Okay. Well, hey everyone, it is Ellen from Advocate of Soul. And as many of you know, I love to bring the human story to life. And I love bringing people on. And in just a second, we seem to be having a back thing here with me. So let me just quiet myself. And, I love hearing the work that people are doing around the globe. And I love to hear how people are helping people, bringing connections in communities. And it's just a real honor to have you, Kristy, with us. I've actually never worked on the ground with you in Thailand, but I have sat in different meetings and sat in different things, and listening to your heart and listening to your passion was one of the reasons I brought you on, because I just knew that you have something to share that is of value, and I just want everybody to hear it. So if you would like to share a little bit about you, and we'll just get started.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for even inviting me onto this. It is so funny because we've talked over messages at different times and like kind of gotten to know each other that way, but we've never met in person. We've never actually worked together. And so this is just fun to be able to sit across the table, if you will, and have a conversation with you. So yeah, as you already said, I mean, my name's Kristy. I am currently in Mae Sot, Thailand. I've been here for 8 years now. And I work with an organization called Outpour Family Foundation in Thailand, known just as Family Foundation. Um, and I mean, we kind of have three main focuses of our ministry. So we do community outreach, we do teaching and training through a cafe and sewing center called Braverly. And then we do a Safe Homeland Project, which is a big project that we're on right now. And it's advocating for legal citizenship for children who've been abandoned with no traceable next of kin, who are also fall under the category of stateless. So they don't have a citizenship in Thailand or in Burma that's right next door to us. And yeah, that's just really been on our heart. There's no one really advocating for them. And so that's been a big pursuit of ours over these past several years now.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. So to become an advocate and to stand in the gap for people in need, there obviously is a backstory and a reason why you're doing what you're doing. And, we don't just suddenly wake up and say, okay, I'm going to advocate for somebody. So do you mind just sharing with everybody just the backstory and how this came about for you? What even drew you to that side of the world and to working with the people you are?
Yeah. It's it's interesting. The really long version of this story gets very long. Quick short version, and then I'll give some other highlights, is I actually never planned to come to this side of the globe.
Oh, how
Asia was never even on my radar, which is hilarious to me to say now when I'm sitting here having been here over 8 years. But I don't know that there was just one specific moment that I can pinpoint, but there's been a lot of little moments throughout my life.
mm,
Because even as a student back in like middle school, high school, even elementary days, I never would have imagined that I would travel overseas. I didn't even get on my first airplane until I was 18 years old. It was after I graduated from high school. Yeah, I
okay.
had just my family, we weren't ones that like traveled internationally at all. We traveled around the country, absolutely. Like we loved camping was our thing. And so we would drive to all these places across the US. And that was kind of my experience of getting out into the world, right? But even as a young kid growing up, I've always just been drawn to people who seem to be kind of on the sidelines a little bit, if that makes sense.
Mm,
Like
mm,
people who are easily maybe overlooked or just misunderstood. I guess there's always kind of been this draw in me of like, well, I don't want to make a judgment call here until I actually know who you are, you know? And so I've always had that draw to those who look different than me, live different than me, just come from a very different background from me, right? And so then open up the doors to international travel, and that's like everywhere else in the world. So my first experience came, I mean, like I said, graduating high school, I went on a classic like mission trip with my church youth group. And so, it's like the 10, 12-day trip or whatever, kind of like highlight reel of missions. It's like this honeymoon phase. There's a lot of good that can come from those trips. But you don't get the full experience of actually being immersed in the culture, right? And
mm,
yet at the same time, there was just something that happened in my spirit during that trip that I was like, this is amazing. Like to go, I've never experienced another culture like this. And there was just something just so incredible about that. And I knew that that wasn't going to be my last taste of it. Um, And so, you know, fast forward several years later, like the thing that you do after high school, at least then, was you go to college. That's just what everyone does. So I went off to college not having a clue what I wanted to do with my life. And just kind of experimenting with lots of different courses. But my college had an international studies program, and I was like, you mean I can major in something that forces me to travel around the world? Like, sign me up. So that's kind of how it really started to come about. And I started to gain more international travel experience um, I did a semester abroad, an area study, and international internship, and got to partner with different people in different places. And then after college, went on to get hired on full time with my church back home, and I worked there for 12 years, and I led a lot of short term teams.
Wow.
Um, and just kind of gained all these different experiences that different cultures really started to get highlighted in my heart. And so the reason I say that Thailand was never on my radar is because I was actually pursuing going to Kenya. That was it was my second trip I ever did outside of my experience with my church youth group. And it was like the first trip that I ever did on my own, really. Like I went with a team, but I didn't know anyone that was a part of the team. And so there was a lot of firsts for me. And through that, I think there was just kind of a different confidence and courage of like, I could do something like this that grew from that experience. And I just fell in love with the culture in Kenya. So I've been there the most. I actually lived there for a year back in May 2011 to 2012, and thought that that would be the place that I would end up. But through another long story, the Lord really shut that door for me, which I thought was such a bad thing at the time. I just felt really broken. Shut the door as in things that I was trying to like make happen just kind of fell apart.
Or-
So the organization I was trying to go and work with, like there was a lot of inner turmoil happening, and it just wasn't a good situation. So it's a really good thing that I didn't go at that time, and things have since been sorted. Um, but I was just very confused by it, and like I thought that this would be my spot. So
Mhm.
now what?
Sure.
Um, and that's when Thailand really came into the picture. So that's how I ended up over here. Yeah, and I didn't, so a big part of my story, I don't want to get too far ahead, but a big part of my story is just cultivating a spirit of courage. And so why that plays into me stepping into Thailand is when the opportunity presented itself, I didn't have a good reason to say no, except for the fact that I was afraid because I'd never considered this side of the world, and it was unfamiliar to me, and I wasn't sure if I could do it. But I've always tried to say, like, I won't let fear make my decisions.
Mhm.
Um, and so that's how I ended up here because I didn't have a good reason to say no.
Oh my gosh, I could go down so many tracks and I can relate to so many things. So I want to backtrack just a little bit. You said something that was very, very telling, and I'm just gonna kind of look at that and then we'll move forward into some other things. But you said that there's a lot of good that can come out of short-term mission trips. And,
Mhm.
you know, as one who was a missionary myself, you know, and led teams and then had teams come in and you're hosting and you're doing all of these things, why do you see the importance of
Mm.
that short-term trip? And I know you saw it for your own life, but if you were talking to someone else and they were saying, "Hey, I kind of want to do a short-term trip too," what can they learn from that? What's the benefit of doing a short-term trip?
Yeah, absolutely. Um, Chances are most people are not going to ever be able to commit in their life to go somewhere for longer than
I
6 to 10 days, right? So you just might never get an experience like this again. So that alone makes it worthwhile, right? Like to just put yourself in a place where you might never have an opportunity to do that again. And there's so much in this world to see that we limit ourselves to be able to see it. And so I'm a huge advocate for people just going somewhere. Like it doesn't have to be like a mission focused trip, but like just go and see. The value that I see in short-term missions is you are typically partnering up with other people who are serving locally. And
Mm,
so you do get to see a picture of like, what are the actual needs in this area? And what are the things that are to be celebrated in this area that I can learn from someone else who's had boots on the ground and has been doing it, you know? So I see a lot of value in that as well, like to watch other people who've committed themselves to being there for different reasons. But there's so much to be gained from doing life alongside others who've also chosen to be there that you can then glean from while experiencing part of the culture for yourself.
Brilliant, brilliant. So what was the first trip? You went to Kenya, but what did you do when you were on the ground there?
Yeah, well, so it was my second trip was Kenya. My first trip was Peru, but I mean, in both places, when I was there, we were serving with a local like pastor who was in the area, who had a church and just like serving in different villages. So I mean, Peru specifically, it would have been the first trip, and we were up in the mountains, the Andes Mountains, which was
Oh,
so incredible.
yeah, that is so incredible. I've been there myself.
Right?
Yeah.
And as a first time, like I didn't know anything else of the world.
Oh
And
my
I'm there and I'm
God.
like, what is this? Yeah. And at that time, like the area that we were, it was a small town called Boyanka, and it was a place that hadn't seen many white people moving through. So there was a lot, going on. Um, but it was so cool. There was such a simplicity in it, in that like we weren't going to be like these amazing people for anyone over there. Like we were going
Yes.
to learn and just soak in a culture and to just share encouragement with people, to just serve them however we could and however like our local connection felt that we could like help. It's not about creating something for us to do, but how can we come alongside and actually partner with what needs done here, or yeah, just serve the people that we've come to see their lives. So that was a lot of that experience, and the Kenya one too. It was just serving people in very practical ways, like helping prepare food for school kids as they got out, and just different things like that.
You mentioned in your bio, you worked with Red Light District as
Mhm.
well. How was that experience for you? Because I could imagine that was a little bit different.
It was. It was. Yeah. I never would have imagined that I would do something like that. Um, So a previous trip that I had taken, that was during the year that I lived there, that I worked with women in the red light district. On a previous trip, I had visited there, because of a friend, like we went on a trip and a friend like had connections to these women and just invited us, like, if you want to come along and just meet some women and hear their stories, like you're more than welcome to. It wasn't about like showcasing them in any way, but just inviting you into someone else's story. Um, and I just remember sitting in two different homes and like hearing these women's stories and just feeling like, I just want you to know that you're seen. Like, I just want you to know that, like, I don't see you as like overlooked or labeled as what everyone else wants to paint a picture of you as. Like, you are just as worthy of love and grace and acceptance as anyone else. And that's what really started to stir in my heart. And so when I went back for the year that I was living there, it was very intentional. Like I was volunteering at a children's home, but I was very intent upon like, I want to make sure that I get time in this community and continue to build these relationships, because these are just women that I want to fight for and that I want to do life alongside. And then I just want to create a friendship with. Like, I just want them to know that they've got a friend.
Yes.
And so that's where that came from. And really, like my visits were often, it wasn't for any one thing in particular. I would just go and visit them in their homes and sit down and listen to their story, or sit down and listen to what did they need to talk about in that moment, hear about what their needs were. And okay, is there a way that I can practically help right now to try to meet those needs, or find a solve that we can figure out how these needs can be met. And so it was really about just cultivating a community of women who could all come together and realize like, hey, what if we did create, like we're maybe rejected from our other families or from society, but what if we built a family together and like cared for one another and realized that we were worth like that kind of fight, that kind of, yeah, people seeing us, knowing us and loving us. So
Oh my gosh, you are speaking my heart. I have to tell you that. You said a couple things, so I'm going to look at these couple things. One, you said that you weren't going into an area to be something, to kind of be the, I'm just going to use some of these terminologies here, but the
yeah,
white savior who
yeah.
comes in to try to save. Can we talk about that a little bit? Because, as one who served as a missionary, I would get different flavors of teams that would come in. So you would get teams that would come in and do what you're doing, which was just sitting down and creating community and just like building connections, building heart connections, just seeing people. Or we had sometimes these other groups that would come in and they were going to just save the day, and they were going to do that. Let's talk to that for a minute. Um,
Yep.
how are you with that? Like the
Yeah.
talk.
So, and that's where I preface the initial thing of like, there's a lot of good that can come from a short-term trip. On the flip side, there's a lot of negative that can come from it. And that's the side of the negative that I think does happen a lot. It's not that it always happens, but I've seen those teams, that have come through. I've experienced that um, where where they get this mindset of white savior mentality and like, I'm here to like help and they don't have a solution apart from us coming.
Yes.
Um, yeah, and so that is the other side of the coin, the unfortunate other side of the coin. And that's the part of it that I don't like. And I think that that doesn't have to happen. It all comes down to the mindset that you come in with. And oftentimes too, I think uh, I don't know that people always realize how it comes off.
Mhm.
That maybe they carry that mentality. And sometimes I think it's very apparent that that's just the mindset that they have, right?
Yep.
But I do think there's times where maybe it's even unknowingly, like it
Sure.
just comes out in a way that if they knew that that's how it was coming out, they'd probably be really like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that that's how this is coming off. Um, so as to answer your question of how am I with that, I don't like that mentality. I never want to invite that mentality. I'm certainly not afraid to address that mentality now if I see
Mm,
it.
mm,
And just right, and not from a place of like, don't ever do this, but from a place of like just understanding, like, have you ever considered that this is how that appears to people or what it can make them feel as a result of that kind of an attitude? So that's where I'm not afraid to address it.
Do you think there needs to be more preparation for people when they are planning to go to a certain area? And what would that look like? If
Yeah.
we're preparing people, like, especially, I mean, I know we're from the US, so that's a whole totally different way of kind of
Yep.
going in. How do you
Yep.
feel preparation needs to be, or should be, or could be?
Yeah. I think a number one question to ask that, I mean, the leaders of the team should be asking of anyone coming onto the team, but anyone applying for a team or like having a consideration of like, I want to go to this place is what is the primary motivation? Like, why do you want to go? And
Yeah.
I think if you start there, you can cut a lot of it out at the very start of like, if your motivation is that I need to go there because I need to be something for these people, I would say that that's a wrong motivation. I
Hmm.
think a right heart posture would be, I want to go, like maybe there is something that you're going to partner with and help, but like if you didn't show up, that doesn't mean that it all falls apart, right? And so I think that's what I mean in that of like just knowing upfront, like why am I motivated to go? What am I hoping to get out of this? What am I hoping to bring to that? And knowing the answers to those questions or what you assume those answers are, will really set you up to come into it one way or another, right? So that would be a big one, I would say off the bat. And I mean, in preparation, I would say to like for me, when I would help lead trips, I always wanted to make sure that we understood like we're not going to create more work for the people who are there on the ground and serving the community already. We're coming in to come alongside them. And if our best way to serve them is just to like encourage them, cheer them on, like make food for them while they're out doing the work, whatever it is, like whatever the best way is that we can serve them, and by serving them, serve their community. Like that's what we're about. This isn't about creating some experience for ourselves. Because we're coming into a place where like this is people's lives, right? Like imagine if someone decided to have a mission trip, quote unquote, to your house, like showed up to your front door and we're coming in because we're gonna like it sounds like such a crazy thing to say, but that's essentially what you're doing. You're showing up to someone's front door and saying like, okay, we're here now. You're in good
Yes.
hands.
Yes.
Yeah.
Wow, wow. And I wonder too if doing a study with people on the culture too, because there can
Mhm.
be perceptions,
Yes.
especially when you're going to developing nations, or
Mhm.
even if you're in nations that are even in worse situations than that, um, that they don't know what they're doing. They're like clueless and and we in the West, we just know what we're doing. And I
Yeah.
sometimes wonder if that that study of the culture and see their resilience. I mean, some of the cultures I was in, especially in Africa, their resilience and their
Yeah.
fortitude ran circles around me.
Yeah.
It was as
Absolutely.
simple as that. And and I'm not ashamed to say this right now. I mean, I was just like, wow, their resilience because of the life and the way that they've had to lead it. So do you
Yeah.
think studying the culture, getting to know the culture prior to going is a wise idea?
Yeah, I think it's always a good idea to know something about the place that you're going. And at the same time I recognize like there's only so much that you can learn and
Sure.
prepare for. But to go in with no understanding and to only go in, I would say, with just your own assumptions, like your own projections of what you think that you know about that place or have seen in photos or whatever, like that's not an accurate depiction of what it is, you know? And so actually learning a little something about it. And that learning can even come from asking questions of whatever, like from whatever people that you're going to join. Because most times when you're going somewhere, like there's a connection that you have to someone. So even asking questions about the culture, like what things do you think would be important for me to know before I come, that can set me up well for really like coming in the right way? That's a valuable question to ask.
Sure, sure. And what about language barriers? Because I found for me, it taught me a whole new way of communication
Yeah.
because we
Yep.
cannot use always our verbiage. So,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit what
Oh,
that's looked like for you because you've been in
yeah.
cultures where other
Yeah.
languages are spoken.
Oh, language barriers. The struggle is real. Um, yeah. So, I mean, one, it's taught me humility a lot.
Yes,
I'm like, right, coming in and like understanding and being okay with the fact that like I just don't know, like I'm not gonna know everything, you know, and that's okay. And we'll find another way to communicate. And yeah, it's true. Like even motions don't always work. And so you kind of learn to laugh at yourself in the midst of it, which is an important quality to have to be able to laugh at yourself and know that others will laugh at your attempts to learn their language. And it's not out of malice or anything like that. It's just, it's funny, right? Um, so yeah, like just just coming in with a humble spirit in that sense. The language barrier is real for me here too. I mean, I've been here 8 years, and Thai is an incredibly hard language. Um, and not to mention the fact that the majority of the people that I'm around the most don't even speak Thai. They speak Karen, which is a tribal language from a group from Burma, or some of them speak Burmese. Like there's all these different languages happening, and I don't know them all, and I'm trying to get a grasp, but my brain is slow with language.
yep.
And yet you find those ways to just communicate. And sometimes, I mean, it's different in each culture. Like when I was in Kenya, even sitting in a room with the women, like a hand in a hand goes a long way to communicate something, right? Like automatically you're communicating, like you're very aware of the person next to you, right? And like they mean something to you and they mean enough to you that you're willing to touch skin, right? And
Yep.
like there's ways to communicate the things that you want to communicate, even if you don't know the words to actually say them.
Mhm. Wow, wow. Okay, so we are now going to move to what it is that you're doing now,
Yeah.
on the border and the Karen people. I met somebody when I was in Chiang Mai.
Mhm.
I think they were part of the Karen. Did you call it a tribe? Is that, I mean, I don't want to, say
Yeah.
things, but lovely. Love their,
Yeah.
oh, they were so heart-centered. I
Yeah.
don't know, they were just so heart-centered. So can you share a little bit about what you're doing on the border?
Yep.
Examples, different ways you're helping and all of that. And what
Yeah.
that's looking like, because they've been through a lot, the Karen people.
They've been through a lot. I mean, all of Burma, legally, technically Myanmar, but we still refer to it as Burma, has been through a lot. So a little like quick background that I'm more than happy to share is Burma has been at war, like a civil war, for over 7 decades now.
Wow.
Um, and yet it rarely has made it into like national, not
Yes.
national, international news. Like it pops in and out in very small moments. But I mean, we're talking like different places, not Karen State, but the Rohingya made the news at one point because there was genocide that was happening. And then there was like all this backtracking of like, no, it's not that. So like it's popped in and out of the public eye. But the war, it still goes on. just a couple weeks ago, I didn't hear it at all last week, but a few weeks ago, we could hear the bombs down at the border. And for context, I'm like 20 kilometers away from the border. So I'm safe where I am, and I'm not the target anyway. But like it's a very real and present thing. Um, and so specific to the Karen people, Karen state is like the closest state right across the border to us, and one of the largest people groups. That crosses, Karen state actually crosses Burma and Thailand. So there's Thai Karen and there's Burma Karen.
Mhm.
Um, and so, but a lot of bombing has been happening in their specific area in Burma, and along the border as a whole. And so, yeah. So all that to say, it's a very real thing that we deal with day in and day out. And all of the people that we work with here have family that are still over on the other side. And so it's very real in that sense too, of like we're dealing with um, people who like carry this weight of like, is my family okay? Aren't they okay? I think they're okay. I can't hear from them that often. So all of those kinds of things. On top of that, we're trying to address like the other issues that get created because of the war happening. A lot of kids end up without parents, right? And like um, a problem that's been along our border for probably forever, but that we learned about several years ago, is child abandonment. And it happens for different reasons. But most often, what will happen is mothers will come across the border and give birth in the hospitals here because Burma's infrastructure is so poor that they don't have good access to like hospitals, medical care, anything like that. And so they come here to have access. Um, and then sometimes it's right, like for every day, they work by the day, they get paid by the day. So for every day you're not working, you're not putting food on the table for the rest of your family. And so a lot of times moms will come give birth, see that their baby is currently being taken care of by like nurses, whatever. Um, and so they head back to work. Sometimes they come back and sometimes they never come back. And there's no way to like follow up and try to trace them. Um, and so, and again, there's all kinds of reasons that abandonment happens. Um, but in light of everything that's happening, sometimes it's that, sometimes it's truly that both parents have been lost in the war or for whatever reason, natural disaster, like there's just different reasons. And there's not a lot of organizations who are equipped to focus specifically on that young age. There's a lot of organizations here that are doing incredible work and they work with older kids and the youth. But
Mhm.
yeah, people feel ill-equipped to handle the teeny tiny babies, and those who do help have limited space. And so that's how we got into the work that we are. And we always get asked like, how many kids do you have? Do you have kids right now? And we don't. Like, we're so early on in this that we just bought land a few years ago. We've been building on that land. We're working toward creating this space where we'll have safe homes, which is like essentially like a family style home where we can bring these kids in, whether it's temporary care, foster care, or if these families that we work with, like our workers, want to eventually adopt themselves. Like we're trying to get spaces set up and we're building relationships with the local government because such a new thing here, adoption, foster care, and like there's no real programs for it. And so essentially pioneering in a lot of ways to help create this structure of a way forward for these kids so that they don't live their whole life stateless. And stateless means limited access to good education,
Mhm.
no access to a job, and yeah, like no access to ever be able to leave this small little town that you grow up in, because on paper you don't technically exist. So working to create the programs where legal citizenship can be restored to these kids and that they have someone to fight for them.
Wow. What is the war over? What?
Yeah, and that's where it gets touchy. So I'll share like briefly, but so the government of Burma they're under militia rule right now.
Yes.
Um, so while there was an election, the person who was rightfully elected has been under house arrest for the majority of her life. And it's been militia rule. A lot of the fighting in the past, like they've always kind of been under this militia rule, not always, but since the war really escalated, been under this militia rule. Um, and in the past, the tactic was to get the tribes to fight each other, to disagree against each other. And while everyone's fighting each other, they're distracted from what's happening with the
Mhm.
militia, right? So it started in that sense. And now it's become, there's been really an awakening among people of like, none of us like this militia rule. Why don't we all kind of band together? And so that's where the continued fighting is people just aren't willing to sit down quietly and let their country be destroyed by the militia that's ruling it. So,
Oh my gosh. Okay, so you've got a 70-year war basically going,
yeah.
and you're trying to help a lot of displaced,
Mhm.
and you're trying to go and appeal to the government for all of this. So
Yeah.
this government is probably used to, how things always have been, and it's just the way it is.
Yep.
How do you appeal to the government? I mean, what are you actually,
Yeah.
I mean, just I mean, I could imagine somebody sitting here going, "Okay, wow, I love what you're doing, but you're having to appeal to the government. Are they open? Are they listening? Like, what do you have to do? Do you have to provide actual like documentation? This is what we're trying to do. How does this all look for you, Kristy?"
Yeah. Yeah, right? It's such an interesting concept. So how it's looked over the past several years is we've just really worked to build good relationships with them, and to do things the right way. Like there's a way to get things done the wrong way,
Oh yeah.
and we don't want to do that, right? And so we really work to. One of the things that happens here a lot because there's a lot of NGOs that come in and out of this place is people along the border will heavily focus on the people across the border and neglect the people of Thailand.
Mm,
And so that's one thing we said from the get-go. I was like, we're here and our hearts are broken for what's happening across the border, but we're also here to serve the people of Thailand. And so isn't there a way to like kind of bridge the gap and like we're just here to serve people in need, right? And to always try to make sure that like we're pouring into both places. We feel called to pour into both places, so let's do that. So that's already one thing that's like set us up to be a little bit different in that we're in the midst of trying to figure out these other programs and create these things. We're also trying to do things where we're serving the people of Thailand. And so we work really closely with the social welfare department of our particular province. And I have often reached out to say, like, what are the needs in this province? And like, is there a way that we can help you guys meet those needs? We're a small team, but if there's things that we can do, we want to do it. And so that's where like some of the teaching and training aspect of our ministry has come in. So we have a cafe and sewing center here called Braverly. Um, and over the years, we've been able to run different training through the cafe for a variety of people. We've had youth come in, we've had kids come in, we've had older adults come in, and it's been teaching practical skills to people. So baking classes, like that's something that the
oh,
cafe does.
yes. Yep.
And so taking the time to like, we work in partnership with the social welfare department. Let's train people. Like, who do you guys want to, like, who do you want to see us train to help give a practical skill, something that they could do themselves to start earning an income? And so through that partnership, they've connected us to different places and said, like, we're going to send you a group from here that wants to, they're interested and they want to come. And then we kind of work alongside them and train them up. And so it's looked like things like that. We've gone into different schools and done English camps, because English is a practical skill that we have. Like I'm not an English teacher, but I can speak English. And so we go into the different schools and we share that kind of stuff to them. And all of those things help to build the relationship that we have, like a working relationship. And the funny thing in that is like we didn't set out to do that just because we want their help with something else. It's not, it can sound very much that way. But we truly do want to just be a help to both nations. And in doing that, they've actually started coming to us and talking about because they know that we're interested in like having this safe homeland and building these homes. And they've actually come to us and started asking, like, yeah, what can we do for these kids that are stateless? Like, this is a problem and it's a growing problem. And how can we solve it? Can you guys help? And so asking us to do the very thing that's already on our heart, which has been really cool to see how that's opened up for us. So that's kind of how it started and where it's at now. So we really are like we meet together at different points and kind of share about like here's the things we see and what we hope to accomplish through this program that we're going to start building. But we're open to how this needs to look and how could we make this happen. And a big key for us too has been starting very small. Like we're not looking to just go in there guns
Right.
a-blazing, like let's
Oh,
take everybody in. Um, so yeah, like we have one specific child in our care now that has been stateless since she was born and is on a journey. She's now one of my teammates has legal guardianship of her, and they're really helping to pioneer like what the program could look like for future kids, like the steps that could be taken toward eventual legal citizenship. But it's started very small and just with lots of conversations and learning and growing together. Like, okay, what if we go to court now and we work on at least getting guardianship so that someone is responsible legally for this child? Okay, now that we've done that, like, what if we do this, you know? So it's been
right.
a lot of working back and forth across those lines.
And it's been building trust.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, you're not going to get anywhere without built trust, and building trust takes time. Like, this is a very transient town too. A lot of people come and go. And that's very common on the mission field in general. Like people come and go a lot. And so there's something to be said for giving a place time and for really like digging your roots down deep and not again because you're trying to like get something from that place, but because you're truly there to like learn and see and figure out like how can I be of help.
Well, your heart, oh my gosh, I can feel your heart coming right through the screen. So when you're dealing with these children, you're dealing with these communities, there's always a, we're going to use the big T word here. There's a lot of trauma.
Yeah.
Do you as a team, are you, I mean, where are you at with trauma? Are you doing trauma informed? Are you learning about different things to know how to meet them? Like, where is the healing? Because the thing that I saw and I felt was like something that I would have loved to have seen, because I did a lot of work with red light districts, and then I also was doing things with child soldiers and different stuff.
Mhm.
And there were a lot of programs that were set, really good programs. You have to have programs. We had to have trainings. You had to have education. You had to have all these things. But the piece that seemed to be lacking was a healing piece,
Mm.
and a piece where the children could work through their traumas, work through things like that. Do
Yeah.
you have people on a team that are trauma informed? Do you work with people that are trauma informed? I know it's a very westernized term, but
Yeah,
what does that
no,
look
but
like?
it's good. Yeah, it's what we're hoping to set ourselves up with. So, like, we ourselves have been trying to take advantage of every opportunity to learn. Like, we just did a training, or we joined a training a couple months ago of like that some another organization who does trauma informed care um put on, and we went and we're like, we just need to sit at the feet of some people and learn ourselves. But we also know that like it's not a responsibility that we can solely carry. Like, so we're also trusting that the right people, we can get the right people within our camp who do have more of the knowledge and the experience of that, because it is such an important piece and we don't want to move forward without it. So I would say we're at the spot of like, we're trying to learn ourselves while also trying to figure out like, yeah, who do we need to get on this team that has the experience that can help all of us go about the healing process in the right, because there very much is a healing process and like it needs to be there. um, so that's where we're at in that, still in the early stages of trying to piece it all together, but very much recognizing like how desperately it's needed.
Is that something that you see within the people in Thailand as well? I know when I worked in the Philippines, there was a lack of understanding of that. It was not something that was really addressed as well. Do you see
Yeah.
that there?
Yeah, and do I see it in the sense of like maybe not addressed as well? Yeah,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yes.
Um, and so I think like for us too, again, like I'm not specifically trained in like whatever the methods are of
Sure.
it. Um, but right, like I'm aware enough to come into a space and just allow space for people to talk about their lives, talk about what they've been through, and feel safe to share story and to share it in the way that they want to. Like I'm careful with my questions, but also intentional with them, you know? Um, and so I find that what when you approach people in that way, like you create a space for them to feel safe to share, you know, and there are, I don't want to say that there's nothing that exists here for trauma care, because there is, and there's organizations that are doing it well. And there's a lot of, especially with like kids and youth, there's a lot of different programs that I've known of, that's like art therapy healing, you know, and like giving a chance to like talk about your trauma through a picture that's in your mind that you just need to like put on a paper, and then potentially talk to someone about that. Um, so there's things like that, but yes, it's very present in the culture and it's not always talked about.
Yes, and I wonder if that's because there's a lot of shaming. I saw when I worked in Asia, there was just a lot of shame attached to stuff. And I
Yeah.
love that you want people to be able to share their stories in a place where it's non-judgment and it takes away the shame. There's always something with that. But do you encounter that? I did. I encountered like when you would bring up certain issues trying to learn something about the culture or whatever, there would be shame attached to that. I was like, well, I don't know, and they don't want to
Yeah.
look at that. Have you
Yeah.
encountered that?
Yeah, honor shame culture has been one of like the hardest things for me to deal with sometimes, of just understanding it, right? Because it's such a different culture than what I've been raised in. And we've got our own issues, right? And it comes out like in a different form. But here it's very blatant in front of your face. Like there's honor and respect or there's absolute shame. And there's not a lot of middle ground to be found in that. Um, and so one of the interesting things for me outside of like the child abandonment, all that stuff and war and all of that, like even culturally, when we were trying to get Braverly in a place, like it's a business here, it's a cafe and a sewing center. And when we were trying to like train up the women for it, and we would explain like, okay, these are the recipes and this is what we're going to do, and does this make sense, does everyone understand? And culturally, honor shame, no one will tell you if they don't understand,
Oh, that's
because that would be a reflection of you being a poor teacher if they had a question
yeah.
and like they didn't understand, right? And so it becomes this frustrating battle of like, I need you to just tell me. Um, and I think that there's something to be said then for time spent with these women, is
Oh,
there's been a trust that's been built, there's been a relationship that's been built, and that they know that when I say like, I will ask all the time after I explain something, doesn't matter who I'm talking to, I will always ask, does that make sense? Because if it doesn't make sense, let me know and I'll try to say it in a different way. Like trying to make someone feel like it's okay for you to ask me a question. I'm not going to be offended by your question. I want you to help me understand too what you're hearing. And I think because of the time that we've had together and because they've seen over and over like this is how I've operated and I know how they operate, like we've come to a place of mutual trust and respect where like we can ask each other questions, we can have those conversations. And while shame still pops up in places, or like the tension of the culture, like we can get past it in a different way because of time spent.
oh my gosh, you are my heart right there. It's all about the time spent. It is. It's
Yeah.
all about cultivating that relationship.
Yeah.
So now you're in a totally different country that has a different religious base.
Yeah. Yep.
How does that play out for you guys within Outpour, and what's that look like for you?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I don't claim to know tons about like we're a largely Buddhist culture.
Yeah.
Um and I mean I've definitely learned more about it. Um but it's definitely something that was a part of like my culture shock of just like, wait, this is just so different. Like what is this? What's happening?
Right,
Why are
exactly.
there monks walking down the road? What are they doing? And all of these different things. But like it's also been a really incredible opportunity to learn. And I think that's been important for all of us of just trying to understand like how does the culture work here? What do people believe? How does that affect like the lifestyle that they have and vice versa? So I think it's something that maybe had scared me at first just because it was so unfamiliar has become a really beautiful thing. Um, and there's definitely times where we feel maybe the tensions of places that we disagree. Um, but not like tensions in a bad way. It's just a, oh, well, okay, I feel very differently about that. But yet we can figure out how to walk alongside each other and it can still be really beautiful. Um, so the tension hasn't been always a bad thing, right? Like it's been an opportunity for either of us to learn. But it's just been different. And so navigating that, I would say on a daily basis for us, like there's just kind of, even beyond like spiritual differences, there's just kind of a heaviness that sits over the atmosphere of Mae Sot. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like it's very apparent. And so much of that comes from just all the things that happen here, right? Like
That's
war across the border. I mean, we're talking like gang activity, like trafficking of all kinds. Like this is a hub for all of that stuff. They refer to Mae Sot as the Wild West of Thailand. Like
uh,
we're very different from everywhere else in Thailand. And so this can be a really tough place to be. So beyond just like what we believe religion wise. Like there's just a whole bunch of stuff kicked up into the atmosphere that becomes a really heavy thing to navigate day in and day out.
So what do you do to navigate it for yourself? Like, how do you find self-care? Because I know how the
Mhm.
mission field can work. It can be very overloaded. It can be very much, well, it can be works driven in a lot of ways. And so people just keep working and working and working and working because the needs are so prevalent, right? They're just, it's right there in front of you. You can see it. And so there can be the heart to want to keep giving out, giving out. What do you do to balance that heaviness that you're talking about with Mae Sot? Because that's huge because we can't give, right, from what we haven't received ourselves. So what do
Yeah.
you do? What are some things that you do?
Yes, yes, and amen, 100%. I have not always done this well, and that's why I can say it with that kind of enthusiasm. Because I spent so much of my life just in a different mindset, right? Like, this is just what life is, and you just got to keep going, keep going, keep going because there's needs
Fun.
everywhere, and you
Mhm.
just go, you know? And I don't think that that's the best approach. It certainly wasn't a healthy approach for myself. Like, I burn out, you know, and
Mhm.
that happens so much. And so, I can cheer because I feel like I'm not perfect at this, but I've gotten a lot better at it. And just cultivating good rhythms of rest. And what I mean by that is in the day to day, finding moments to just step back for a second, like, okay, this is feeling like a lot, and I don't know what to do with this right now, but also I don't need to have the solution to this. So, what do I need to do right now? Like, let me just step back and take a breath. And so, cultivating those kinds of moments, but rhythms of rest in the sense of like, because our team is so small, we've been able to do this well. And we've set it up this way for any future teammates that come now. But we deeply value rest. And so my teammate and I, we will often, it's usually about every 3 months, we just know we need to get out of town, even if it's only for a weekend. We just need to get ourselves up over the mountain pass because that heaviness that I was talking about, it just lifts somehow when you get up over those mountains and just can like see a different part of Thailand, understand like a different environment and atmosphere. There's just something to that. And so that's been a big one for us. Like just time out. We're not gonna be working on work, emails, messages, whatever. Like we're gonna try to leave the things that feel heavy and that we've got to figure out at some point back in Mae Sot just for a couple days so we can go and just clear our minds, take care of ourselves, do something fun for ourselves. Maybe something fun is just sitting in a room by myself and reading a book or writing in a journal. Like that sounds glorious to me sometimes. So, but really prioritizing that and understanding that like I'll never be able to give what like I desire to give and to give well to people to do the job that I'm here to do well if I don't ever pour back into myself. And it sounds so opposite. It can almost sound selfish sometimes, I think, which I think is a ridiculous mindset. I don't think it's selfish. I think it's just practical care for yourself that you can't give what you don't have. So,
That's correct. And it's a form of self-love. It,
yeah,
it's a
absolutely.
form of accepting your whole person. I
Yep.
can't do this today. This just
Yep.
isn't happening. So
Yep.
and and
Yep.
and allowing yourself to not condemn yourself for that. I think, there
Yeah.
can be there was used to be a lot of messages when, different things going out when I was doing missions,
Mhm.
from different churches, that it was just like, hey, when you come back to the States or you're going to come back, we want you to, they line you up with a whole itinerary. And it's just like, you know what? Hey, wait a minute. I think I just need poured into.
Yeah.
I think I need ministered to. And I love the vision that you're having because you want it to be sustainable. You want
Yeah.
the work that you're doing to be sustainable. We don't need flash in the pan works. We just don't.
No,
It doesn't work.
it
It
doesn't. It
breeds
won't last.
no, it won't last. It breeds distrust amongst communities,
Yep.
when they're just as people checking out because we just can't do it. But it's not because you couldn't do it. It was because you didn't know necessarily maybe how to do it and the rhythms that work for you. And I
Yep.
found, for myself that there were people who could go for hours doing things. And the older
Mhm.
I was getting, the more I was
Mhm.
realizing I just can't do that anymore. And I had
Yeah.
to be okay with that and realize that
Yeah.
maybe there's a shift that spirit is leading me into and a different
Yep.
way of doing something than it is about, I need to be able to keep going and pushing. And, because
Yeah.
that's such a very Western idea, very American, work 80
It's
hours
a
a week.
Yeah, it's a very toxic mindset. And I
Oh,
think it comes down to really just knowing yourself too, right? Like just
hmm.
because maybe you're around people that have like they feel like they have a really large capacity. First of all, just because you have a large capacity doesn't mean you always need to carry as much of it as you can,
Yes,
right? And
amen.
like
Yes,
I will preach that all day. Like that's awesome that you have a large capacity. What are you doing to actually take care of yourself though?
exactly.
Yeah, so I it really comes down to just knowing yourself and being open, just never because we get caught in this mindset too, like we go, 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 and we think that we're irreplaceable, like that the thing
Oh,
can't go without us, and that's just not true. And I had to spend so much time like kind of backtracking from that mindset because I had lived in it for so long, and it wasn't any one person's fault. It was just something that I just believed to be true, right? Like I'd kind of seen it play out and felt that I was told that and like, yeah, this is what we do. And I had to finally take a step back and be like, I can't do this though. Like I don't like who I'm becoming in the midst of it. I don't like how I feel like my family was starting to get my leftovers, like I would get sick all the time, like run down all the time. And I didn't like that version of Kristy. And so I knew that like things needed to shift. And that shift was like, how am I actually pouring back into myself so that I can keep going and doing the work that I love to do? Like, I never want to hate the thing that I'm doing. And if you just work, work, work long enough, you'll eventually come to hate the thing that you're working on.
and then you can resent the people group even.
Yeah,
Mean, it can
absolutely.
go.
Absolutely.
I dealt with that. I was the one who, burned myself out in the early stages of missions, and I started hating the people. And I thought, okay, this is maybe not the way I should be. This is not how it should be going. I know I'm supposed to be loving people, and right now I'm not loving even myself, let alone.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I love the emphasis on your personal well-being, taking time to be poured back into, to be
Yep.
revitalized, not seeing yourself as the savior. You got it. All these things that we've been talking about today and just what you've learned and what you're gleaning is all still a continual growth and process, right? You're going to continue to grow, you're going to continue to do these things. But what is absolutely amazing, I think, is you haven't forgotten back in the day when you first
Mm.
did this. You've kept a childlikeness to it. You've kept a zeal. You've kept a passion. You've kept an excitement to it. And I believe
Mm.
that's one of the reasons there's a sustainability with you. And you've learned from every hiccup. You've learned from every challenge. You're still learning, and there's more challenges, and it's all gonna, but it's a glorious, beautiful, majestic mess at the end of the
Yeah.
day, because
Yes.
that's just being human. And some of
Yep.
it's just, it can't be all about the gifts we bring. And sometimes it's just being
Yeah.
human, sitting with people and being human. And I love the message, Kristy. And I'm going to fast forward here to one more area. And I just want to
Yep.
talk about the book that you've written, um,
Yeah.
the reason you've written the book you have, and
Mhm.
a little bit about empowering women.
Yeah. Yeah. So the book is called A Place Called Braverly. And it's a little bit of a deceptive title because there is a place called Braverly here, but the book itself is not about that place.
Okay.
Um, but it is written focused on the heart behind that place. And so Braverly as the actual location, as the cafe and sewing center, I keep pointing that way because it is that direction behind me. Um, but Braverly was built on this idea of what could it look like to have a space, and specifically because me and my friend Kayla, who we were raising this thing up, we are women, and so what does it look like to have a space that empowers women, that pours into women in a community that maybe isn't so much about empowering women, right? Like there's limited roles for them. What could it look like to provide a space where they're empowered not just to have a job, but to have a job that they've dreamt about, like to do something that they're passionate about and that they want to be able to do, and also still provide for their families. So that's kind of how Braverly started. But the mission behind Braverly is, what if we could create a space for a community of women to learn what it means to live brave, to dream bravely, and in doing those things, influence bravery in others, like influence others to take their own courageous steps. And that's really the heartbeat behind what Braverly is, but also why this book was written. So essentially, in a nutshell, it's a book about being a person of courage, not just a woman of courage. Anyone could pick up this book, I would hope, and be challenged toward living a life of courage. So we wrote it because we wanted to empower people with that message. But the reason we even put together a book in the first place is because messages like that, and specifically geared toward women, don't exist in this culture in the written word, and especially not in their heart language. And so we set out to do it like, let's just write this thing, put it together, kind of like a blueprint for like our own journey and our experience toward what it can look like to live brave, to dream bravely, to influence bravery in others. And let's get it translated into their heart language so this can truly become just a tool to encourage the women here. Um, and the Lord kind of took that and blew it up, and we published it in America a couple years ago, which was awesome and crazy, and we never anticipated that. But yeah, the heart of it is about learning to live with courage. And it's a very personal message to me because I've lived so much of my life directed by fear. Um, and I've just made such an effort personally to not allow fear to dictate the decisions that I make. That's how I ended up in Thailand, right? Like the only good reason I had to say no was because I was afraid. And that's not a good enough reason to me. And to have come to a place in my own life that I can say that with such confidence of like, I knew that it was fear that was going to direct that decision. And I'm not okay with fear making my decisions. It's been a long, hard fought journey to get to that spot. And so that's really where this book comes from for me and my friend who wrote it is that battle of like, I'm going to learn how to be someone who chooses courage, and I don't have it all figured out and I won't do this perfectly. But if I can share even like some of what I've learned with someone else and challenge them to take their own courageous steps, then I think it's worthwhile.
I love you, Kristy. I just love your heart. I love your spirit and the way you articulate it so well. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thank
And
you.
I'm gonna wrap this up, but where can, like, if somebody wants to reach out to you or something, like, where can they find you? Where can they find what it's Outpour Family Foundation?
Yeah,
Where can
Outpour
they
Family
find
Foundation. So outpourfamilyfoundation.org is our website.
that? Okay.
Um, it's kind of under construction, but you should be able to
I
find it
get
okay.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I am on Instagram and Facebook loosely. I'm not super consistent with it. But Instagram is Kristy J. Michael. It is a private account, but it's not like I won't accept people onto it. I'm just careful about what I share
Sure.
on there. And then yeah, Facebook is just Kristy Mikel. So I'm on those places. And there's probably links. I have a website, but I haven't used it in a couple of years, so probably don't put that
Yeah,
out there
I will.
right now.
I totally get it. I'm right there with you. Are there any last departing words that you would like to share with the audience?
I just have to say again, I'm so thankful to have had the opportunity to sit across the table with you and have this conversation. I love what you're doing and just giving a place for people to share their stories. I think it's just such a beautiful thing. Like there's a lot to be learned from each other if we would just sit down and share story and listen.
Mm.
So I'm thankful for this opportunity, and to the person who's listening who just needs that little push of courage toward whatever you're doing, is my heart and soul. And so just know that even though I have no idea who you are, there is someone cheering you on to be the courageous person that you were created to be. Yeah. And you can totally go after whatever the thing is that's in your heart, or whatever the fear is that's coming at you. Your courage can be greater than that.
Thank you, Kristy. Kristy, thank you for being here. And everybody, I will get all the links up for you and ways that you can, reach out and things like that. Are there anything before I go? It just kind of jumped in my spirit. Are there any, like, what are some things that you are needing, like
Mm.
maybe supply wise, or is there monetary things that you're needing as well, like for the foundation itself?
Yeah, I mean, if anyone follows along to the website, the links and stuff will be on there. I mean, we are in the midst, I shared earlier about our safe homeland. We are in the midst of building this space right now. So there's definitely opportunity to give toward that. There's links to give toward any of the ministry that we do that's explained on this site. So
Okay.
whether it's like giving toward our community outreach, which is helping provide food for people in the community in partnership with the governing office, or helping with the projects happening out on the land. Like the links are all there. Yeah, the land is certainly the biggest need that always rises to the top because it's going to take a lot to see the dream
Absolutely.
accomplished.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you, Kristy, so much for being
Yeah.
here. And I will be in touch with you after, I'm sure. So, but
Sounds
thank you so much, honestly, for being here. Yeah, just, it's meant a lot.